Hello and welcome to 6 Paths. Today I am gonna start a dark series. What if Naruto went berserk? Part 1. If you enjoy the video, give it a big thumbs up, and if you don't want to miss future parts, then subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notification. Now let's begin. You have been warned. An intense forest being covered by the darkness of the night hid a man and a woman with a bulging belly. Both sweaty and tired. Jumping over a fallen tree, the man turned to the woman and helped her, catching her in his arm before she could fall to the ground after stumbling. The barking of dogs could be heard in the distance, and the man lifted the torch he was holding, his eyes widening as he saw several flashes of light, several torches approaching quickly. "Kushina, dear, get up, come on." His tired and slightly trembling voice with a drawn-out intonation as he helped the woman showed all the fear he felt, the fear that dominated his body as they fled from the men chasing them.
He put one of Kushina's arms around his neck and continued on his way, his heart beating faster and stronger as he heard the footsteps, the dogs and the shouts approaching.
A small mistake, a crack in a plan planned for weeks, collapsed because of a small slip. Perhaps he was too naive that the escape of two slaves would not lead to disastrous consequences. Or that he would have to kill his lord in order to escape with his wife. Sure, it was not in the plans, but he did what was necessary. His lord was not supposed to be in that place at that time. Minato. I can't. Kushina's tired voice brought him a worried look, and the anxiety in his eyes caused his gaze to scan his wife's body. She was not injured, but exhausted, and her hand was constantly on her belly. Their son could be born at any moment, and if it weren't for the fact that Kushina would be separated from him as soon as she gave birth, they would still be in the house they were in, living their slave lives. "I know, baby, I know, hang in there, okay? Just for now." Squeezing her waist tighter, Minato began to drag them both through the forest, despair overwhelming his chest. Deep inside, he knew he couldn't get very far. His throat closed up and time around him seemed to slow down. All noises were muffled except for the growl of a dog that was approaching just beside him. Letting go of Kushina, Minato turns quickly and puts the torch in front of the animal that jumped towards him trying to bite him. His body is thrown to the ground, and he begins a contest of strength with the dog that bites hard into the wood of the torch, its claws dragging along Minato's chest. But it wasn't the dog just above him that worried him, that made his chest hurt, but the man who approached just behind Kushina, and in a single movement, stuck a knife in her back. Minato's world again went into slow motion, and a mute scream escaped his throat. His hands closed, still holding the torch, and his eyes followed Kushina's body as it fell to the ground, with the knife still stuck in her back. Gritting his teeth, Minato stuck his finger in the dog's eye and kicked him away, ignoring the blood splashing on his face and getting up immediately afterwards, throwing the torch towards the man. Minato ran towards him, furious and with tears already streaming down his cheeks, and punched him in the face, sending him to the ground. He picked up a rock, his eyes raging without turning away from the man who raised his arms and shouted a few muffled words. With quick, accurate and merciless movements, Minato smashes the man's skull with the stone, and then throws it aside, turning and running towards Kushina. "Kushina. Honey, hey." He shakes her a few times, but with no response. His blue eyes in agony stared into his wife's lifeless blue ones after the knife had struck her heart. "No. Hey, Kushina. Get up, please, get up." He begged, louder now, his voice choked and his vision already obstructed by tears. An arrow hit the ground just beside his leg, and Minato looked away from his wife. They were coming. One of the pursuing men shouted his name as another rain of arrows flew towards him. Minato threw himself backwards, hiding behind a tree, still trying to find a way to get closer to Kushina. But he couldn't. The arrows didn't stop being shot in his direction, and some of them hit the woman's lifeless body, sticking in her abdomen and even in her head. A scream of agony escaped Minato's throat, and kicking one of the dogs that approached him, he turned and began to run away, allowing himself to be swallowed by the darkness of the dense forest. The men chased after him, but 3 of them stopped at Kushina's body, running their eyes over her wounds. One of them bent down and picked up the knife stuck in her back, wiping the blood on the woman's clothes. "Arg! Look what Minato did." The man who picked up the knife said, a rather gloomy tone, and an even sad look to more attentive eyes. TSC, they were going to be separated, but she and the baby would be alive, at least. Although, I can't say I blame him. I would do the same. Another one said, arms crossed and a faraway look on his face. It's really a shame. Come on, the sooner we find Minato, the better. Hopefully, he won't be dead by the time we get there. Another said, this one holding the torch, and without waiting for the others to respond, he started running. The 2 men stared at Kushina's body for a while longer, until they both sighed and went their way as well. Hours later, predators of the night and creatures surrounded the woman's body and devoured part of her flesh. They opened her stomach and ate her entrails, until they were satisfied and left, not even noticing the small shrunken body covered in blood that fell to the ground. Hours later, perhaps days, the cry of a baby was heard by deaf ears, and it permeated for some time, in which no predator approached that already rotting body. The red ground exuded the smell of blood. The earth stained by dried blood being shaped by the footsteps of men walking in the opposite direction from which Minato had fled. Christ! What happened here? One of them asked, sword in hand and a pouch on his back as he calmly approached the arrows stuck in the ground. From the tracks. Someone was being pursued a few days ago. Unfortunately, the woman did not survive. Another one said, this one with a bow on his back, and some rabbits tied together over his shoulder, crouched just in front of Kushina's body. My God. She was pregnant. The baby. It didn't survive. The man, apparently the hunter, interrupted the previous one, watching the still baby near the woman's blood-stained legs. The baby was too thin, next to the few visible maggots that were already crawling all over her body. She was a slave. Perhaps she was killed for trying to escape. The hunter said after seeing the mark on the woman's neck, made by hot iron, branded into her flesh. And then the mercenaries are the merciless ones. The man with the sword said, putting it back into its sheath and crossing his arms. Well. And we are merciless. The hunter said. Yes, in battle. I know I would never kill a pregnant woman. After she has given birth, however, that is another story. The man replied, sighing with some regret, and turned and began to walk away. The other men followed him, but the hunter remained in his place for a while longer, his eyes still watchful of the scene that would give many a nightmare. A sigh also escapes his lips, and he stands up. But before he could move away, he heard a low cough, and soon, everyone there heard the crying of the little blonde boy who had just woken up. What the? This boy is alive. One of them exclaimed in disbelief, walking briskly towards them. The hunter's dark eyes seemed to glow as he watched the child, and in a few moments he took a cloth from the small pouch attached to his belt and took the boy in his arms, after wrapping him up in the cloth. Whoa, hey, boss, are you going to take him with us? One of them asked, and he arched an eyebrow. Why not? Because. Well. This. Ah, come on, boss, this isn't normal. He tried to say, but no words could get out of his throat. He didn't really know what to think about that situation, and he doubted that a few simple words would explain all his thoughts. You're afraid of a dying baby, eh? I am not doing this to keep him, but so that when he dies, he will have a burial, something his mother unfortunately did not have. the hunter said, covering some more parts of the baby in his arms and tucking him in, before starting to walk out of the forest. The hunters looked at each other, but said nothing, and soon began to follow their leader. The little golden-haired boy was looking at the tadpoles in the crystal-clear water of the small lake. His intense blue eyes followed each of the little animals, while next to him was a frog that he affectionately nicknamed Gamakichi. It had been a while since they had set up camp there, and since the little boy did not have many friends, the orange-colored frog made good company. He had met Gamakichi when he was still young, about 2 years ago, and now at the age of 6, the little boy could say that the little frog was the closest thing to him. With a twig, the boy began to draw on the wet dirt, making strokes and strokes over and over again, and making a perfect drawing of him, his father, and of course, Gamakichi. Soon, children's voices were heard, and raising his head, the boy followed with his eyes some boys walking ahead, talking amiably among themselves. The little blondie watched them and realized that they were going to enter the forest alone. Throwing the branch aside, he takes Gamakichi in his arms and runs towards the group of boys. "Soda!" he shouts, and the big boy turns around. A disgruntled look and a disgusted grumble escapes his lips, but something the little blonde boy was used to ignoring. "Ah, Naruto, what are you doing here? Come on, get back to camp," Soda said with a tone of disinterest, scratching the back of his neck and sighing soon after. "Where are you going? Let me go too," Naruto asked, his hopeful blue eyes staring at the larger boy in front of him. No matter how many times he asked and was refused, that small hope in his chest refused to die. Soda sighed once more, but a strange gleam ran through his caramel eyes. "Okay, wait a minute," he said, turning around and whispering something that Naruto couldn't hear, but that didn't stop him from continuing to stare at them as he gently squeezed Gamakichi in his arms. "Okay, Naruto, we'll let you come with us," Soda said some time later, and the boy's blue eyes sparkled with joy. "Really? Sure, we're friends, right? But you will have to do something to prove that you deserve to hang out with us. If you succeed, whenever we go out, we will call you," Soda said with a friendly smile, putting his hand on Naruto's shoulder, who could hardly believe what he had heard. "Are you really serious?" "Yes, I promise. Come on, let's go, I'll explain what you have to do." Naruto smiled broadly as he felt Soda's hand on his back, and giving Gamakichi a gentle caress, he began to walk along with the group of boys, who surrounded him and chatted amiably with him. "I always see you with that frog," one of them said, patting Gamakichi on the head a little. "He is my friend, his name is Gamakichi. He had a brother, Gamatatsu, but I haven't seen Gamatatsu in a while," Naruto replied, happy to have a friendly conversation with them for a change, and not just cold or ignorant looks. They walked together for a while, and Naruto ran his eyes around as he saw that the forest grew darker. It had never gotten very far from the camp. His father, who wasn't really his father, wouldn't let him, but since he and his group of mercenaries were away on a mission that day, he could enjoy it a little more. After a while, they came to a small hill, with a very steep descent to a small cave below. "So, Naruto, ready to show your worth?" Soda asked, and the blonde blinked in confusion, squeezing Gamakichi a little tighter in his arms, getting a bad feeling in his chest. "How?" "Oh, it's quite easy." Soda squeezed Naruto's back lightly. "All you have to do is go down that lair, pick up some rock, and climb back up here." A test of courage. Naruto stared at the cave. The bad feeling in his chest grew stronger, and he took a few short steps back. Do I really have to do this?" His voice trembled slightly, as did his arms. "Oh, of course, we all did." Naruto, This is not just a test of courage, it is a test to see how far you are willing to go for your friends. Soda said, grabbing him lightly by the arm. We are friends, right? Naruto stared into Soda's caramel eyes for a while, blinking in fear. He didn't want to go. The bad feeling in his chest kept him from going any closer to the edge of that hill. But when he went to refuse, he felt two hands on his back, and a small frightened scream escaped his throat as he felt his body being pushed forward. Naruto closed his eyes tightly and hugged Gamakichi as he felt his body roll downhill, until it finally stopped rolling. He groaned slightly as he felt his body aching, and heard the laughter of the boys at the top of the hill getting further and further away. As he stood up, he let go of Gamakichi and looked up. They were gone. They had pushed him off and left him there. Beginning to despair, Naruto tries to climb the hill again, but the damp earth and steep climb always made him slip down again. And he didn't have enough strength to propel himself to a small tree ahead and try to climb up from there. Soda. He shouted for the boy, backing away slightly as he squeezed his wrist, looking up the hill with teary eyes. Guys. A noise behind him silenced him, and a chill ran down his spine. He unconsciously held his breath and began to turn slowly, feeling the fear in his body grow more intense as the sound of footsteps approached. From the cave, a predator was calmly approaching. Yellow beastly eyes staring unblinkingly in his direction. His father had told him. A wounded mountain lion prowled the area, or something like that, which was one of the reasons he warned him not to go too far from camp. Naruto felt his body lock up, his hands began to sweat and his arms to shake as he forced his body backwards, although, his legs could only take a few shaky steps backwards due to fear. The predator walked slowly, stepping somewhat carefully on his injured paw, but showing no discomfort. A blink of an eye, that's what prompted the mountain lion to attack. Naruto yelped and scrambled away, trying to run as the predator gobbled up Gamakichi. The little frog managed to buy Naruto a little time to run, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't long before he was almost completely devoured and the mountain lion started running towards Naruto. The boy screamed amidst his panting, hearing the animal's footsteps getting closer and closer and feeling the desperation in his chest increase. Soon, he screamed once more as he felt his back hit in a weight on him, as well as a sharp pain in his shoulder that made him scream at the top of his lungs. His small hands were trying to drag his body along the ground, and the cries of pain became louder and more frequent not only from his shoulder but as the animal's claws occasionally tore at his back. Picking up a rock, Naruto hits the sharp part of the rock on the animal's head, luckily, or maybe not, hitting it near the eye. Adrenaline coursed through the little boy's body, making it possible for him to ignore the pain and start running again after getting up. However, the mountain lion still ran at him, and just before it attacked, Naruto turned around. In pure reflex he put his arms in front of his body, squeezing the neck of the animal that fell on top of him. But it was clear that the mountain lion was stronger, and his small arms couldn't keep the beast's teeth away for long. Not to mention that the animal tried to attack him with its claws, and at one point, it managed to hit Naruto's face, who screamed once more and threw his head to the opposite side of the lion's paws, feeling his cheek burn and blood run down the side of his face. 3 claw marks on his right cheek. Crying in pure desperation, Naruto begins to run his eyes around, until he finds a sharp, somewhat thick branch not far from there. Using his knees to hold the mountain lion above him, he tries to grab the branch, but couldn't, it was still too far away. His mind was racing, and screaming once more, Naruto throws his torso to the side and removes his hands from the neck of the mountain lion, which once again bites his already wounded shoulder. A high-pitched scream escapes Naruto's throat, and despite the enormous pain, Naruto manages to grab the branch. In a quick movement of pure desperation, He stabs the branch into the mountain lion's neck several times, ignoring the enormous amount of blood that stained his face. The animal growled several times, getting off Naruto after being attacked. However, the boy didn't let the lion get too far away, viciously attacking the animal with the sharp piece of branch, piercing its body, slamming it against its head. The adrenaline was doing a good job at inhibiting the pain, but the more he moved, the more the pain increased. Both tired, bloodied beings stared at each other. Naruto's eyes burned in a blue flame, and the mountain lion's yellow ones didn't blink as it stared at him. Until the animal fell to the side, and Naruto watched its torso rise and fall for some time, until it was completely still. The branch he was holding slipped from his small hands, his vision blurred, and his legs became weak. He fell, but before the darkness completely covered him, he still heard his father's voice calling his name. His body ached. His cheek and shoulder felt like they were on fire, and some small parts on his back were burning in minor intensities, but enough to make him regret moving at all. Groaning slightly, Naruto opens his eyes. His still blurred vision takes a while to come into focus, and his brain recognizes the place he was in. The medical tent they used in the camp. Hard to mistake that old roof and that characteristic smell of death. Our little warrior awakes. His father's deep voice made his body shiver, and trying to ignore the pain in his body, Naruto turns his face towards him. Dad. The man's dark eyes twinkle for a while, until he sighs with some irritation and relief. I already told you I'm not your dad. They remain silent for a while, until he sighs again. You disobeyed me. I warned you that there was a wounded predator prowling the area, and still you realize that you could have been killed? His voice was calm, but there were emotions behind his words. Each sentence, a slap in the blonde's already sore face. I know what you said, but I wanted to have fun, you know. Enjoy, explore the forest. And you think it was a good idea to do this alone? Naruto widened his eyes, and stared at his father's face for a while. Alone. They didn't tell. The boy took a sharp breath and bit his lower lip, hard to the point where blood dripped, and tightened the sheet of the bed he was lying on, controlling the anger and frustration that surged in his chest. If you had gone with an adult, I wouldn't have been so angry. I would understand, you are a curious and active child. But it was stupid of you to go alone. You could have been fucking killed. The man scolded, and Naruto squeezed his eyes shut tightly. His father rarely got angry, but when he did, it was in extreme or important situations, for extreme and important reasons. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. He said in a breathy voice, settling down on the bed and hiding part of his face with the sheet that covered him. His father stared at him for a while, watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to watch his soul, until he stood up and turned away. Not before he left a necklace made of the mountain lion's claws on Naruto's body. Get well soon. When you get moving, we'll start your training. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. He said now with a calmer, even cold voice, before leaving the tent he was in. Naruto turned over on the bed and closed his eyes, clenching the necklace with the claws in his hand, remembering those tense moments with that ferocious animal. Remembering Gamakichi, who despite not speaking and being only a frog, was a great friend. Soda. Yumi. Akai. Yuke. He whispered the names of those who tried to kill him and who hid that fact. Also orphans, but older than him, more independent. Soda could already go to the battlefield as a support, or just a cargo boy. If they disappeared, no one would really care. He would not forget. Ducking, Naruto attempts a low cut on his father, who defends with his sword and kicks him in the face. But the boy throws his torso back and strikes again, trying to pierce the man's abdomen, who deflects and tries to cut the side of his body, but Naruto defends with his sword. Soon, his father punches him in the face, followed by a kick to the stomach and again attacks with the sword. Naruto recovers and deflects, counterattacking. But once again, his father defends with his own sword and kicks the side of Naruto's abdomen, who bends over and groans in pain. Your reflexes have improved, but they are still very slow. You don't put all your strength into your sword, and this is a fatal mistake on the battlefield. Although, your low attacks are good considering your size. Go get something to eat, we leave in an hour and a half to go hunting. His father said, turning and propping his sword on a nearby table, walking away soon after. Naruto followed the man with his eyes, trying to ignore the malicious comments of the boys not far away. Ever since he started with that training, they hadn't missed a chance to mock him for his failures. Just because they were older. Or maybe it was the fact that he hid that they were the ones who took him into the forest and pushed him down that hill. Sighing, Naruto props up his sword next to his father's and walks toward one of the tents. In his tent, Naruto looks down at his calloused hand, trembling from swinging that sword around so much. Every day at dusk he would go away from the camp and swing his sword until his hands bled, until he could no longer hold his own instrument of battle. His father also trained him in archery, and even in throwing knives, but he only felt safe, complete, with a sword in hand. Sighing, he looks at his reflection in the dirty mirror in front of him. His hair was long, the scars on his cheek made him look different. He never really cared about that. Those scars, as well as those mountain lion claws stuck on a necklace around his neck, were reminders of the hardest battle of his life. Taking the claws, he gently passes them over his scars, imitating the movement that animal had made when it had wounded his face. Now 10 years old, he still kept that memory in his mind, and often rubbed his fingers over his cheek. He still remembered the reaction of the others when he came out of that tent. Looking at him as if he were Christ reborn. Such a young boy against such a fierce, though wounded, beast. He hated those looks before. And he hated those looks now. Sighing, he shakes his head and begins to cut his hair, leaving it short and with a simple hairstyle. He never cared much about his appearance, his routine didn't allow it, and even if it did, he probably wouldn't do it. After undressing, he blew out the candle that was on the table beside him and lay down on his makeshift bed. He would leave in the morning the next day, accompanying his father for the first time to the battlefield, only as a support or cargo boy, but that was enough. It was already an experience of what a battlefield was like. And who knows, if he was lucky, he might even get to pick up the weapons of dead soldiers. It was not uncommon for mercenaries to be hired to take part in wars between two kingdoms, or simply city against city. Closing his eyes, the boy struggled to sleep, something he rarely managed to do without spending some time concentrating. Nightmares plagued him. Perhaps not nightmares, but strange dreams that made no sense. Various animals, wolf-like perhaps, appeared devouring him. Or rather, devouring the flesh around him, but never touching a single tooth to his skin. He saw entrails, flesh, bones being torn out all around him, but never from his own body. Shrinking from the cold, he looks once more at his sword, just in front of his body, and again closes his eyes. He didn't know how long he had been lying there, or whether he was asleep or awake, but the characteristic smell of smoke invaded his nose, something that bothered him at first, but was not enough to wake him. However, screams followed soon after. Attack, enemy, muffled cries barely audible because of the excessive noise, but they had these two words in common. Opening his eyes suddenly, the first thing Naruto does is to pick up his sword, and then to stand up. He widened his eyes when he saw an unknown man in his tent, with a mace in hand. He had dark brown hair and a beard, face covered by a helmet. light armor over parts of his body, but a lot of exposed skin. The man tries to attack Naruto, however, the boy deflects and throws a chair aside towards the man, giving him enough time to attack him with his sword. Training was one thing, but the actual situation was extremely different. Naruto hit the armor, and almost fell when his sword was deflected. The man recovers and punches the boy in the face, trying to attack him again soon after. However, Naruto picked up the lamp beside him and threw it at the man's head. Grabbing the hilt of his sword with both hands, Naruto drives his blade into one of the man's legs and throws his body against him, knocking him down. Grabbing alcohol, Naruto pours it over the man and sparks it with his own sword. The fire spreads quickly, and the screams of horrors would be heard throughout the camp if not for other screams and sounds of battle coming from outside. Naruto stares at the man's burning body for some time. The sensation of piercing the flesh of a man was different from that of piercing the flesh of an animal. It was uncomfortable. Strange, to say the least. No chance he could beat that man with just his sword. That armor, although it covered few parts of his body, covered enough for him to be able to react in time to kill him. Swallowing hard, Naruto left his tent before he was engulfed in flames. The first thing he saw were a few bodies lying on the ground. Bodies of people he knew, and people he had no idea who they were. Some tents were also on fire, and amidst the sounds of sword against sword, screams of man against man, there were the screams of women being killed alongside the combatants. A surprise attack by the enemy army, perhaps? Naruto's mind didn't focus on that for long. His legs moved, and he started to run towards the tent of his father, the leader of that band. On the way, he stopped when he saw Soda fighting two men. The boy was doing well for someone so young. Deflecting the attack of one of his enemies, he throws his body to the side and with his sword cuts off the other man's arm, followed by a piercing attack on his neck. The first man recovered and attacked him, cutting the side of his abdomen and hitting him with the hilt of his sword. Soda staggered backwards but recovered quickly, ducking the next attack and counterattacking with a piercing blow from his sword, killing his enemy. Soda was panting, with cuts all over his body and sweat dripping down his back. He leaned on his sword as he watched the bodies below him. However, he could do no more than this. Blood began to drip from his mouth, and trembling, he turned his face back. Naruto. You bastard. Naruto stared at him with cold eyes, removing his sword from his back with one swift movement and watching as the boy fell to the ground. He never forgot the day he threw him down that hill. His beautiful blue eyes looked at the blood on his sword, his whole being focused on the dripping blood on the ground. He took his first life. His father always told him that this would mark him. The first life he took would follow him forever, as if a weight had been placed on his back. But he felt nothing. Shaking his head, he turns and starts running again, passing through the destroyed and burning tents. Further ahead, the general of the enemy army, more men approaching. Gritting his teeth, Naruto runs his eyes around and focuses them on a fallen barrel beside one of the few tents not yet on fire. Quickly, he grabs the lid of the barrel and crawls inside, hiding. He heard the sound of horses, more and more shouting, muffled voices around him, until the only noise he could hear was the sound of flames burning the surrounding tents. He didn't know how long he had been in that barrel, but when he came out, it was already daylight. A few tents were still burning, low flames, and most were just emitting smoke. There was no one around. No one alive, at least. Not that he could see. Desperation pounded in his chest, his legs were running as fast as they could through the ruined camp, screaming for his father, for anyone who was alive. Nothing, nobody, just bodies and bodies lying on the ground. until he arrived at his father's tent, destroyed, perhaps even more than the rest of the camp. Bodies of armed and fully armored soldiers were lying on the ground, among them his father's body, with 2 swords stuck in his chest. Naruto's knees nearly gave way, and he was stunned, bewildered as tears began to stream down his face. With staggering, trembling steps, he approached his father's body, kneeling beside him and gently touching his face, hiding his own face in the curve of the dead man's neck. On the ground, his hand touched the black handle and silver detail of his father's sword. And his mind wondered what he should do now. Where he should go. He was alone. For the first time. Sneaking down the alley, his beautiful blue eyes focus on a few items ahead, merchandise, not very valuable to some, but like jewelry to others. Around them, 3 men were talking loudly. All 3 in plain clothes, but burly and with somewhat frightening expressions. "Where is that piece of shit?" one of them complained. He had black hair, part of his hair replaced by a large scar from the beginning of his forehead to halfway up his head. A simple lime green tank top, dark pants, also simple. "He is late. We won't make much from today's merchandise alone." Another said, this one slimmer than the previous one, similar clothes and straight brown hair. Bending down a little, Naruto takes a few deep breaths, and then pulls hard on a rope that was beside his foot. As soon as he did, a huge noise happened, as if something hard made of wood had fallen. The 3 men were startled by the noise, and their eyes immediately stared at a huge wooden box sliding down from the roof in front of them, hitting them extremely hard and breaking as it knocked them down. Naruto thanked whoever it was that had left that box on that roof like that. Sighing, he runs towards the goods and puts everything he saw into his bag, listening to the men screaming as he did so. "What the hell, kid?" The largest of them shouted angrily, and Naruto looked at him for only a few moments before he started to run from there. He was a long way from the center, which was not of much advantage to him. But on the other hand, his size allowed him to run almost anywhere between those houses and narrow alleys. For example, he could throw his bag over a high wall and go through a small hole at the base of the wall, tight even for him, but wide enough to squeeze through. "Damn it. Go around the sides." Naruto heard the man shout, and a victorious smile broke out on his lips. The men ran through the alleys, in which he purposely let himself be seen. At a certain moment, in the middle of that maze of narrow alleys, the 3 men found themselves face to face. "What the? What are you doing here?" the black-haired man said, almost shouting in anger. "The same as you. The boy tricked us. He must be going downtown now. Arg, damn it." The 3 men started running together down the alleys, and a smiling Naruto came out of a barrel in front of an old house not far from there. He had done that and run through those alleys too many times already. He knew that place, he was used to it. With a sigh, he fastens the bag on his back and walks calmly in the opposite direction from the men. It is a vase in good condition, newly purchased, and the blankets are of a great wool, made in the fire country itself. Naruto sold his items with a friendly smile on his face. The people, of slightly advanced age, looked at his products with analytical eyes. One of the men there took a coin purse and 5 copper coins for Naruto, who thanked him cheerfully and put the coins in his back pocket. "These oranges were harvested this morning. They are fresh, as are the apples and lemons. They all have the same price, 1 copper coin for 3 fruits." A middle-aged lady gave him 2 copper coins and took 6 oranges, and the small group of his newest customers slowly broke up. When there was no one around, Naruto sighed and looked at his few goods. He had managed to sell a good portion of it, but most of it consisted of fruit, so even if he had gotten a good amount of copper coins, it still wasn't much. Drying his sweat, he looked up at the sky. The hot sun burned his back, but something he was used to. The melancholy of the blue in his eyes was absorbed by the even more intense blue of the sky. In those 3 months that had passed, he had not made much progress. Grief still surrounded him, although it was masked by a cheerful and gentle, even childlike, face. His biggest problems in the first few weeks were money and food. It took him about a month to reach a town. On the way he survived on what nature provided. Thanks to his father's teachings, he was not in such great need. However, his bridles ran out, his clothes were torn, and the forest was not a suitable place for a child to sleep, although he had grown accustomed to it. To enter the city, he had to hide his sword in an abandoned hut a little way off, and had to sleep on the street while still looking for new clothes to steal. At least to look decent. Looking at his situation now, he wondered what he would do a week from now. A month from now. A year. 10 years. He still wondered how he got to that point. He shook his head and picked up his things, wrapping his goods in a cloth and putting them in an old wheelbarrow that a woman was going to throw away some time ago. Walking through the poorer parts of the city, he arrives at his temporary dwelling. A cardboard box in a damp alley. He found a way to make the place more resistant, putting broken shingles over the cardboard box, 2 pieces of wood that supported a roof he built himself with scraps he found lying around. It wasn't much, but it was already safer than sleeping on the street. Sighing, he hides his things and puts away most of his money. His first goal was to save enough money to get out of that depressing and dangerous city. Who knows, maybe he could join a mercenary group, or go to a bigger city and get a better way to make a living. Although, if he was honest with himself, roaring his sword was what made him really happy. Putting his hands behind his head, he walks through the dirty streets of the small town towards the center, heading towards his favorite restaurant, this being the cheapest he could find in the center. There were also restaurants in poorer places, but the last time he went to one of them, the plates and cutlery were still dirty from the previous customer. He would not risk dying from eating something on those plates, no chance. When he arrived at the restaurant, he waved to the owner, who waved back with a friendly smile. The owner of that place was a good man. He gave him a permanent discount for any dish he ordered. And every now and then Naruto would order a slightly more expensive dish, in the vague hope that this pleasure might make his mind wander and focus elsewhere. His father's face always appeared in his mind whenever he stopped doing something, whenever he was quiet, whenever he went to sleep. It was difficult to make that pain in his chest recede, since with each passing day it seemed to get stronger, more intense. After lunch, his mind wandered to the things that worried him as he returned to his home. He had sold all his fruit, and had nothing to eat for the rest of the day. There was no way he could steal more fruit from the place he had stolen earlier. The boy ran his hands through his hair, briefly touching the bandage that covered the scar on his face. After walking for some time, he reached his spot, and soon, his eyes widened as he saw 2 men standing in front of the alley he used to sleep in. Damn. They found me. Swallowing hard, he turned and started walking in the opposite direction. They could keep the few goods he has not yet sold, and the blondie doubts that they have managed to find his hidden money. As he turns around, however, he runs into the black-haired man with the scar on his head, and is greeted almost immediately by a loud slap across his face. Hey! I found the little shit! The man shouted, grabbing Naruto tightly by the arm as the others approached.
What the hell, kid?
Do you know what we've been through because of you? One of the men he couldn't identify grabbed him hard by the neck, and the boy groaned in pain as he felt another slap across his face. You robbed us and sold our goods. I could kill you right here and now, and no one would care about garbage. But I'll give you a chance. Give me the money you got and we'll let you go. The man with the scar said, stooping down and looking Naruto in the eye. As soon as he did, Naruto spat in his face, ignoring the pain in his cheek, and kicked him in the groin. Turning quickly, he grabbed a pocket knife from his belt and stabbed the arm of the man holding his neck, finally throwing his knife at the third man. The blade stabbed into his shoulder, and the man's groan of pain was only muffled by the sound of Naruto's footsteps as he began to run towards the center of town. "Son of a bitch!" The man with the scar shouted, getting up and running as fast as he could after Naruto, although he couldn't ignore the pain between his legs. The boy had a strong kick. Nothing more to be expected from a boy with a slightly advanced physique like Naruto's, who, despite finding himself in the situation he was in, never stopped training. His father would kill him if he skipped a day of training. However, the same did not apply to the man with straight brown hair, who was advancing rapidly toward the blonde. Naruto gasped, sneaking down an alley and throwing himself on the damp ground, letting his feet slide under a hole in the wall. Just then, he stood up and leapt on the wall, taking 2 steps on the smooth sloping surface and leaping over a higher wall. Use your surroundings, something his father had always told him. He could hear the muffled voices of the men who parted ways. Naruto knew those alleys, so he clicked his tongue. On the bright side, he would end up in the center if he went his way. On the downside, all those alleys converged, meaning he would have to be faster than the men to get to the center. There was no way back, since the brown-haired man was still chasing him. Letting his body slide again, Naruto's eyes widened slightly after jumping off a roof, and he rolled as he hit the ground, running as fast as he could to the end of the alley. It wasn't long before he saw the end of the alley, people walking from one side to the other just ahead, as well as some guards. A smile broke out on his lips at the sight of the guards ahead, and his chest was marked with relief. He would have to move out of his alley, but it was all right, he would deal with it later. Before he could reach the end of the alley, however, 2 strong arms held him, one squeezing his waist, the other with a hand over his mouth. "You little shit, I got you." The man with the scar growled, violently pulling Naruto back, who struggled and tried to free himself from his grip. There were several ways to take down a larger enemy, however, in that situation, Naruto couldn't do much. He didn't have a brute strength that could match that man's, nor a weapon to use. Maybe his teeth, but what he could do at most was bite his opponent's arm, before being completely overpowered. But despite this, he didn't stop struggling. Not when they tied his hands and legs, not when they put him on their shoulders and took him to a secluded place. Not even when they began to beat him mercilessly. On the ground, Naruto cringed. His body trembled, blood dripped from his mouth and from wounds on his face, arms and torso. He was weak, but his hands and legs were free. At least. The man with the scar on his head crouched down and pulled him by the hair. Gritting his teeth in pain, Naruto opened his eyes weakly, recognizing the place he was in. The abandoned hut. Look kid, I understand, okay? I understand, you stole to get something to eat, I can sympathize with that. But that's not why I'm going to take it easy. The man punched him again in the face, and Naruto groaned softly as he felt his head hit the ground. If you had given us the money, we would have left you alone by now. We would have forgotten. The man stared with cold eyes as the boy slowly crawled along the ground towards the side of the hut. A futile attempt in his eyes, but he allowed this small hope to settle in the boy's chest. But no. Things turned out differently when you did that stupid thing. My friend Khan over there really wants to kill you for throwing that knife at his shoulder, and frankly, I'm tempted to let him. The man almost smiled when he saw Naruto lying on his back, just beside a hole in the cabin. His small chest slowly rising and falling, his hand over his face, hiding his eyes. Soon, the man approached, and crouched down right in front of Naruto. "Now. We'll let this one go, I'll let you live. But you'll have to start paying, taxes. 50% of everything you get in your sales." Naruto took a few deep breaths, clenching his left fist as his right passed through the hole in the hut. "I could take more, leave you even more miserable than you already are, but..." He was interrupted by his own sounds of agony. Blood spurted from his mouth, and his eyes widened at the sight of Naruto holding a sword that pierced his neck. The boy was staring at him. Cold, intense blue flames burned in his eyes as he watched the man drown in his own blood. "What the fuck?" one of them shouted, and it was as if reality came back to Naruto. The blonde boy gritted his teeth, his heart beating faster and his veins bulging as the rage spread through his chest. Grabbing the knife from the man's waist, he threw it at the brown-haired man, getting up and running towards the other soon after. The man's eyes widened and he grabbed his sword, attempting a side-slashing attack on Naruto. However, he deflected and pierced one of his legs. The man cried out in pain and fell to his knees, perfect timing for the boy, who drew his sword hard and pierced his opponent's chest. Dropping his sword, Naruto dodged an attack coming from the brown-haired man and kicked the side of his knee. The man was off balance, but recovered quickly and kicked the side of Naruto's. Naruto just ignored the blow and advanced against the man, leaping over himself and knocking him to the ground, strangling him. The man gritted his teeth and grabbed the knife Naruto threw in his direction, stabbing the blade into the side of the boy's abdomen. Naruto screamed in pain and rage, feeling his hot blood run down the side of his body, but the pain only made him clutch the man's neck even tighter, and the man began to struggle with a growing desperation in his chest. He tried to punch Naruto, but the boy just ignored it, still clutching his neck. The man tried to reach for the knife again, but the blonde moved and put his two knees on top of both arms of the man he was strangling, still with his strong hands around his neck. His intense blue eyes stared unblinkingly into the man's desperate brown eyes, until he began to grow weaker, and finally, motionless. Naruto continued to squeeze the man's neck, panting, and with anger receding inside him, making the pain in his body even more evident. But by that point, he was beginning to get used to it. Rising to his feet, he took his father's sword, which was still stuck in the chest of the man he had killed earlier, and stabbed it into the neck of the brown-haired man. Naruto leaned on the sword still stuck in the body below him, closing his eyes with some force and letting his mind go. He was alive. 3 men dead. But he was alive. His father would be proud, maybe. Proud that he had survived, but angry that he had let himself get so beaten by opponents who initially had no intention of killing him. It would be a shame for the mercenaries, even though it was a victory. His eyes landed on the knife still stuck in the side of his abdomen. It hurt like hell. But strangely, he didn't mind the pain. In fact, he was even happy to feel it. Drawing his sword with some force, Naruto staggered a few times and groaned in pain as he ducked, scanning the bodies of those men. They didn't have much. Cigarettes, a lighter, and some copper coins. Well, that was something. Tearing off part of the blouse of one of them, Naruto took a few deep breaths as he looked at the knife stuck in his body. He had no money to pay for a doctor. He doubted that any would be kind enough to help him for just a few copper coins. He barely had 2 silver coins, and a visit to the doctor cost 5 of them. That's the cheapest doctor. A groan escaped his throat as he put his hand on the handle of the knife. Luckily, it didn't seem to have hit any major organs. But he would have to be careful. He didn't want to do any more damage removing the blade than he had suffered when he was stabbed. Naruto gritted his teeth as he began to pull the knife out. His grip tightened on the piece of clothing in his hand, and he raised his head to the sky, his eyes closed tightly, and he controlled himself not to scream. After a few agonizing moments, he managed to remove the knife, and quickly began to tie that piece of clothing around his wound. He didn't have anything to stitch, and even if he did, he didn't really know how, although, it would be a good time to practice. When he finished, he stayed on his knees for some time, his eyes fixed on the ground that was slowly being stained by his blood. His hands were stained red, and his mind wandered over what he had been through recently. What should he do? Why? What should he find? If there was something for him somewhere. Getting up, he leaned on the sword almost bigger than he was, and began his slow and painful walk towards the city. He could not stay there any longer. Someone would eventually miss those men, sooner or later their bodies would be found. He had to go. Hopefully, the little money he had would do something. That, in a very positive thought. On the way, he didn't come across many people, and the few he saw ignored him. That place was cruel. People had their own problems and ignored the problems of others. But the place he was staying was a little isolated, so he didn't run into many people. Taking his money, he took a few more deep breaths before putting the sword back into its sheath, slung slightly behind his back. He left the city without much hope, but he didn't know that the next few days would be so bad. He walked alone on deserted roads. His money was not enough to buy arrows and food, but with a little crying, he managed to buy enough. However, the food didn't last long, and he didn't think he wouldn't encounter a single animal during all those days. Fruit occasionally crossed his path, and he kept it in his bag, but it was not enough. It was a long way from a town, and there was no going back from that point. Rain became frequent. He walked with an old cloak during the day, and tried to seek shelter from the rain in the forest at night. He didn't cross paths with any living soul in those days. Maybe weeks, not one person, no animals, nothing. It was as if he was the last person on Earth, doomed to wander endlessly through nothingness, alone. The wounds on his body did nothing to help, they only made it worse than it already was. On one particular day, however, he smiled when he saw horses on the horizon. Horses ridden by humanoid silhouettes. People, finally. His chest filled with joy, and he even forgot the chill of the rain against his body as the horses approached. 3 men, 3 horses, all well equipped, compared to Naruto, of course. Whoa, a boy? Here? One of them asked, apparently surprised. Naruto was too tired to pay attention to him, he only paid attention to his shaven head with tattoos. Oh, kid, where are your parents? Your group? Another asked, his long dark beard being the most noticeable thing. Who cares? It's obvious that the boy is in bad shape. The third said, this one had short hair, no beard, and unlike the others, it was blonde. Not an intense hair, similar to Naruto's gold, but different. I am on the road. For some time now. Naruto said between gasps. Please, do you have food? Can you tell me where the nearest town is? I haven't seen a sign for a long time. The men stared at Naruto for some time, digesting the words spoken in his weak voice. Yes. We have food. The bald man said, getting off his horse. We can give you food. Better yet, we can give you a ride to the next town, if you do something for us. He said, getting closer and closer with each word. Although tired and wounded, Naruto moved a few steps away, preparing to pick up his sword, just in case. Oh, who cares? Fuck, we don't have to do anything. Just get it over with and leave the boy behind. There's no one around. The man with the long beard said with an irritated tone, also getting off his horse and crossing his arms. Naruto blinked in confusion, but soon, his eyes widened as the man advanced towards him, his arm already touching the hilt of his sword. He wasn't fast enough, however, and the man knocked him to the ground, flipping him onto his back and pinning him down. "Whoa, look at this sword. It's beautiful," he said, analyzing the blade for a few moments, before throwing the sword to one of his companions. Naruto, below his feet, was trying to fight off the man who was starting to throw his things to the side. "Hold still." Those were the words Naruto could hear, before he was hit with a punch strong enough to stun him. His vision blurred and the noise around him became muffled. His body became weak, but this did not inhibit some sensations. Like, for example, the feeling of his pants being pulled off his body and him being pressed against the ground. His blue eyes widened widely as he realized the man's intentions, and a scream escaped his throat. He struggled harder, spitting out a certain amount of blood as he tried to escape his grasp. Tears began to form in his eyes as he felt a finger. But he refused to let them roll down his face. Another finger. He gritted his teeth, and the fear in his chest slowly turned to anger. His eyes focused on a nearby rock, and as he picked it up, Naruto screamed as he spun his body around. He kicked the man in the face as he did so, and acting fast, hit the rock in his eye. The man cried out in pain and walked away with his hand on his face, blood quickly spreading through his fingers. Without stopping there, Naruto picked up the knife that had fallen to the ground beside his pants and stabbed it into the man's stomach, who widened his eye and knelt down. Slightly widening his eyes, Naruto uses the bald guy's body as a shield for an arrow, and takes the crossbow that was on the man's back. Resting the crossbow on the shoulders of his dying opponent, he fires at the long-bearded man, hitting him in the arm. Gritting his teeth, the boy runs toward the short-haired man after grabbing the bald man's sword. He feigns a horizontal slashing attack, and the man prepared to defend. However, Naruto cancelled his attack and held the hilt of the sword with both hands, piercing the groin of the man, who cried out in pain. A scream that didn't last long, as Naruto drove his knife into his neck. As soon as he did, however, the boy also cried out in pain as he felt an arrow pierce his shoulder, and as he looked to the side, he uses the horse as a shield as he saw the long-bearded man approaching him with a crossbow in hand. With his sword, Naruto cuts off part of the side of the horse's body, which neighed loudly and began to move violently, kicking in the air and running over the man as he rushed. The man became unstable and fell, but recovered quickly and turned toward Naruto with his crossbow. Not fast enough, however, and the next thing he saw was Naruto's sword coming down hard on his head. Everything went dark, and in a moment, he could no longer feel anything. Naruto stared at the man's body still wide-eyed. Gasping, aching, blotchy. His chest hurt every time he breathed, his legs were weak, and he felt dirty. He hugged his own arms and his fingernails scratched at his skin, tearing a few trickles of blood from the outer side of his biceps. His throat was closed and tears almost rolled down his face. But he stopped them. He would not allow himself to cry. Closing his eyes tightly, he took several strong breaths, until he calmed down. The rain washed away his blood, but it did not wash those sensations from him. His empty blue eyes looked at his father's sword on the ground. Crouching down, he groaned in pain as he picked up the sword from the ground. He now had a horse, at least. But he didn't feel like it was worth it. 9 silver coins, 20 bronze and no gold. Well, he could at least afford a doctor now, if he was lucky enough to find one cheap enough. Food, there was plenty, for one person, of course. Naruto stared at the dirt road with distant, almost empty, cold blue eyes. Day and night, rain and at certain brief moments the sun showed its face. He barely slept. He couldn't. He always had nightmares, but they got worse, new traumas appeared to torment him. The face of that man so close to his own. His arms being held and his body pressed to the ground. He screamed, but his voice would not come out, and when it did, his cries for help fell on deaf ears. Days passed, and the more nightmares he had, the more he realized that he could count on no one but himself. In his dreams, no one was there to help him. When he was pushed off that hill and attacked by that beast, nobody saved him, he killed it alone. When those men took him to that isolated hut, no one stopped them. When he walked bloodstained and wounded through the town, no one offered to help. He didn't need a knight in shining armor, he only needed himself. When he finally noticed this, his nightmares changed. That same dream where he saw several creatures devouring a body, tearing out flesh and bones, but never hurting him. More days passed, and he finally arrived in another city. This one was apparently larger than the previous one. He walked across a bridge, not caring enough to read the name written on those signs. His clothes were stained with blood. His wounds no longer hurt, and only when he reached that city did he realize that his body, though stained red, was better. Tired, but his injuries were healing, and some had even healed. He always had a strong body, he recovered quickly. A blessing for one born from the guts of death. As some people in his band used to say. He rode his horse into town, until he got off the horse and began to walk calmly with it by his side, his small hand holding the reins and pulling gently as he walked. It was impossible not to notice the looks thrown in his direction, but he didn't care. Surprised looks. Perhaps at the blood on his clothes, or the sword on his back, or perhaps at the fact that a child was with a horse, although it might not be that surprising. Arriving at the center, he sketches the slightest expression as he sees intense movement around the place. But he had neither the will nor the energy to check what it was. He would buy some supplies, clothes, maybe even stop by a blacksmith, rest a bit, and think about his next steps. The more he occupied his mind that day, the better. Because of the commotion, few people paid attention to him and his condition. Most just looked in his direction because of his horse. On the way, he stared, not far from there, at the entrance of a blacksmith's shop. It was then that he remembered that they did not normally sell armor to children. He would have to order custom-made, and this would probably cost more. A sigh escaped his lips, and he walked in the opposite direction, towards a store that sold some fruit further on. "Welcome. What the hell? What happened to you, kid?" The man, probably the store owner, asked. A gleam of curiosity in his eyes, as well as confusion, but not exactly concern. How much is it? The blonde ignored the man's question, pointing at the apples in front of him, his raspy voice making the owner arch an eyebrow, getting the message. 1 bag of apples, 6 bronze coins. Naruto stared at him for a while. And how many apples are in the bag? 6. The boy snorted, not hiding his displeasure. 6 bronze coins for 6 apples. That guy probably thought he was an idiot, trying to take advantage of a child, or that area of town was home to a lot of rich or well-off people. "I will pay for whatever he asks." A male voice came from behind Naruto, and he looked over his shoulder at the man with a certain disinterest. He was a tall man, already of a somewhat advanced age from the lines on his face, with dark hair and a small beard of the same color. He wore fancy clothes, gold necklace and rings that were probably worth a fortune. A nobleman, of course. Lord. Of course, sir. You can ask for anything, boy. Lord? Naruto clenches his eyes slightly, before turning and beginning to scan the fruit. He could feel the gaze of the said lord upon him, and it bothered him deeply. The bad feeling appeared in his chest, and he became more and more impatient to get away from there. What a wonderfully unique color. He heard the man say, and soon, he felt a caress on his head. Images raced through his mind, his body tensed, and his muscles acted out of reflex, slapping the man's hand hard and stepping away. "Don't touch me. He almost shouted, putting his hand on the hilt of his sword and stepping away with trembling steps. The lord was startled at first, but soon, he just smiled, looking unfazed by the strong reaction. "Are you a swordsman? This sword is a bit too big for you, don't you think?" Naruto gritted his teeth and picked up the fruit bags, taking the reins of his horse soon after and getting out of there as fast as he could. A fierce little boy. The blondie could hear what he said, which only served to make him angrier and the bad feeling in his chest increase. As he walked away, the feeling lessened, but still permeated his chest. His instincts were warning him that this city was dangerous. He wouldn't stay any longer than necessary, and even though he didn't want to admit it, that lord had saved him a good deal of money. After getting far enough away, he looks at himself. He needed new clothes. But he doubted that anyone would let him get in that state, covered in blood, dried and dirty, making it obvious that he had been on the road for some time. Again, he sighs. He had to try. Maybe. Walking through town at a slow pace, he stops at a certain moment and stares at some clothes that were on display in a small store. Simple clothes, but they were of a similar size to his. Getting closer, Naruto raises his hand to touch the fabric, but is stopped by the owner. "What the? Hey, hey! Don't touch my stuff!" The man scolded, slapping Naruto's hand, who took a few steps back. "Damn beggars! Come on, get out of here! There's nothing for you here." The man continued, and Naruto just stared at him for a while, until he spat on the ground, just in front of his feet, and turned to get out of there. However, the man saw this as bad intentions, and grabbed Naruto's arm while raising his other arm. A slap hit the boy's face. Again, images raced through his mind and his body acted on impulse. Picking up his sword, Naruto slashed the man's torso, from the base of his abdomen to his upper chest. Blood spurted into his face, and the man's wide eyes stared at the sword in his hands in a frightened, even desperate way. Blood dripped from his mouth, and the merchant fell to the ground. Naruto stared at the man's body with a frightened look at first. He did not want to kill him, it was not his intention. The screams around him were muffled, and the more he stared at that body, the more the guilt in his chest disappeared, until there was nothing left but a numb feeling. His arms, once trembling, were calm, maybe a little warm, but just the way they usually were. The sound of his sword returning to its sheath brought reality back to him, and as he looked around, Naruto gritted his teeth at the sight of people's frightened faces. He had to get out of there. He heard someone say they would call the guards. Grabbing the reins of his horse, he mounts the animal and gets out of there as fast as he could. The news, however, traveled fast. Not counting the fact that some guards saw him, it wasn't long before he was a wanted man. Boy. Before he could get out of town, some guards on horses appeared in front of, and behind him. Naruto clicked his tongue and got off his horse, running towards an alley and sneaking up the steep walls until he reached the sewer. That disgusting smell irritated his nose and made his eyes water, but he didn't have time to care about that. He had barely arrived in town and he was already wanted. Maybe he should have seen this coming. Sighing, he threw his back against the cold, damp wall. His eyes focused on the ground, but with his consciousness far from his body. Remembering those last moments. His body acted on impulse, unconscious, not the way his father had said. He didn't want to kill that man, but something made him act as he felt his hand, the pain on his cheek. And strange enough, he didn't feel so guilty. It startled him, but soon, that neutral expression permeated his face. Why should he feel guilty? Guilt never got him anywhere. And he doubted it would. That man didn't seem guilty about kicking a needy boy out of his store. In a way, he was just as bad as Naruto. Maybe that was just an excuse, but the boy didn't care. With long, quick strides, he walks following the flowing water of the sewer, wandering for hours alongside the rats, always going out of his way after hearing voices of guards looking for him, or even camouflaging himself in dark and incredibly disgusting places, until he finally finds a secluded place where he can get out and breathe fresh air again. The heavy rain helped to cleanse, at least partially, his body. Running his eyes around, he grumbles softly as he sees several guards walking along the road, even in the heavy rain. There was no way to go above. He would have to go back into the sewer. As soon as he did, however, the sound of armor and heavy footsteps caught his attention, and he grumbled once more as he saw some guards approaching, shouting for him as soon as they noticed him. But what kind of city was that? The guards in the previous city were not as active or dedicated as these. Running with some difficulty because the water had risen due to the rain, Naruto moved blindly through the sewer, hoping to find an opening or some way to lose the guards on his tail. But to no avail. It was a labyrinth, and the further he went, the more it seemed as if he was entering deep into the city. The footsteps behind him became louder, and Naruto grabbed his sword as he turned, attacking the guard next to him. The guard defended his attack and slightly widened his eyes. Naruto was stronger than they thought, although they must have already suspected it due to the slightly larger physique he sported. In one swift movement, Naruto kicks the guard's leg and strikes once more with his sword. Again the guard defends and moves 2 steps away, striking with a piercing attack towards Naruto, who deflected to the side and with one precise movement severed the guard's hand. A high-pitched scream echoed through the sewer. The guard backed away, and that's when Naruto saw that he must hurry. Turning, he begins to run again, his eyes widening as he sees an arrow strike the ground a little in front of him. Turning to the right, Naruto runs for a while longer until he focuses his eyes on a door not far from there, on a small platform above the filthy water. As he turns, he dodges, by pure reflex, a slashing attack by a guard's sword. He quickly counters with his own sword. However, the guard blocks and counters with a punch to the face, followed by a kick to the stomach and finally a sword attack. Naruto groans in pain but recovers, leaping to the side and striking the guard's leg with his blade. The officer groaned and fell to his knees. If Naruto didn't kill him with his sword, the germs present in that water certainly would. In one swift movement, the boy held the hilt of his sword with both hands and slashed the man's throat, a precise and accurate cut, and a deep one where he narrowly missed severing the guard's head completely. Naruto turned around as soon as he killed the man, running towards the door. But not before being hit by an arrow in his back. He screamed as he felt the sharp pain spread through his body, felt the arrow pierce his lung, and his eyes stared at the bloody iron tip that pierced his body. He found himself falling, but he leaned on his sword and gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move despite the pain. Climbing up the platform, Naruto passed through the door, which was thankfully open, and closed it, hurrying his steps up the stairs that followed. He braced himself against the wall as he moved, his vision becoming blurred and the pain in his chest too strong for him to think of anything else. Biting his lower lip, Naruto slams against the wall and backs away, running up the stairs as he feels adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he reaches the end of the stairs, he begins to despair as he sees that the exit door was locked. Gritting his teeth, he starts to kick the door, but to no avail. It was an iron door, opened only with a key. His heart began to beat faster as he heard the door open and the footsteps of the guards approaching. He kicked the door harder and more often, the sound of his kicks echoing everywhere, and from blow to blow the door shook and became mutilated. Turning, he attacked the first guard who approached, hard enough to cause the sword to be thrown from the man's hand, and finally, pierced his neck and kicked his body down the stairs, slowing the guards who were coming up. With a shout of effort, Naruto kicks the door once more, and the iron structure fell to the ground in a loud thud, part deformed by the constant blows. Naruto runs, however, is surrendered by numerous guards who have surrounded him, pointing spears and swords in his direction. The boy's eyes widen, but he holds his own sword tightly, running his eyes down that row of guards in front of him and hearing more guards coming up behind him. By the gods, he is wounded. Naruto's eyes widened slightly at the sight of that lord from before, a strange look in his direction, surrounded by some guards in different armor, more pretty, perhaps? Maybe pretty wasn't the right word. Why is he wounded? The lord asked, looking at one of the guards behind Naruto. Only then did the boy notice the rank on the side of each guard's shoulder. That particular one had a different rank, the captain, perhaps. The boy is not just any kid, he killed some of our guards. So what? Shall I remind you that I paid a fortune to capture him intact? You have stained my boy's beautiful skin. Naruto clenched his eyes and gritted his teeth upon hearing, my boy. Where else will I find tanned skin like that? The lord approached, not caring about the warnings of the surrounding guards. Naruto opened his eyes wide and waited patiently for the lord to approach, alert for any strange movement and prepared to kill him at the mere sign. A simple movement, quick and precise. The lord, however, stopped a dozen steps away from him, without looking away. Boy, put down that sword. As much as I would love to see a rarity like you in action, I don't want you to get hurt. I can't sully this natural beauty. The tone of the man's voice made Naruto want to vomit, and instead of putting down the sword, he gripped the handle tighter, staring coldly at the man, who sighed. Arg, I love a challenge, but I'm not in the mood for it at the moment. Immobilize him. The moment the lord said this, the guards approached. Naruto turned and attacked the first one he saw, throwing his sword away. Then the boy dodged to the side a blow with the spear from one of the guards, and pierced the man in the arm, turning his sword and hitting another who came too close. A fine show of power from someone so young, but it was not enough. There were too many, and it wasn't long before he had his sword taken from him and his body pressed against the ground again. His body tensed, and his teeth gritted. A scream came from his throat as he felt those sensations from that very day. Even though he was okay in the end, getting out of that situation was enough for his body to not feel safe, not even a little. Clean him up and take him to my place, I will pay you enough to forget about him. The lord said, just before Naruto was knocked out by a blow to his head. The little blonde was sitting on a sunny plain, just in front of a river, watching the current that followed its course calmly. Occasionally he spotted some fish and even a few frogs. At one point he even thought he saw his old friend Gamakichi. Strange to miss a frog. Beside him, he heard some footsteps and the sound of a person sitting down. He was not surprised to see his father's dark eyes also appreciating the water. They were silent for some time, the wind gently kissing their faces and swaying their hair. There were few times Naruto had seen his father with long hair. It hasn't been easy for you, I see. His deep voice started the conversation, and Naruto sighed. He missed his father, but as his father had taught him, he didn't show it. He had learned to hide his emotions well. Well, some of them, at least. It could be worse. His father looked at him. You don't believe this and I know it. The blonde sighed, leaning his arms on his knees after leaning forward a little. His chest hurt. I miss you. He stared at him, his intense blue eyes already moist. I miss calling you Dad, even though you said you weren't. And I know you're nothing more than a figment of my head, but you have no one to lean on, so you lean on yourself. They both snorted. Even though it is part of his head, Naruto feels as if he is talking to his father. They acted almost identically at times, although Naruto was clearly more active, so to speak. Dash dot. You are a strong boy, he said after some time in silence, and Naruto sighed, unable to tell if it was his conscience, or you'll survive. You've been fighting death since the moment you were born. It won't be bandits, or a nobleman, or even demons, that will bring you down. The voice of his old man became more and more distant, and the plain disappeared, until darkness dominated. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, getting used to all those sensations in his body, especially the coldness of the ground he was lying on. The pain from his injuries no longer bothered him. Coughing a few times, he slowly stands up, feeling parts of his body still numb. Straightening his posture, he stands and snaps his bones, now calmer. Looking down at his body, he closes his eyes as he sees his bandaged, treated wounds. Although it is pleasurable news, he did not like at all to see that he was naked. Reality fell upon him like a bag of bricks. Instinctively, he put his hand on his back in an attempt to get his sword, and despaired slightly as he realized that there was nothing there. Growling in a mixture of anger and fear, he threw himself against the bars of that saddle. He was not in a prison, not a public prison, and that was obvious. This place was clean and too nice. Hey, get me out of here, he shouted, kicking the cell door a few times, ignoring the pain in his foot. Hey, you son of a bitch, he shouted louder, throwing himself against the bars, but received no response. Nothing, just silence. They're not coming. A childish voice came not far from where he was standing, and Naruto turned suddenly, alert. However, he almost let his guard down when he saw other boys in a different cell than him, just next door. Young boys, not much older than himself. All naked. Each looking pretty, so to speak. Straight hair dark and brown, eyes from green to caramel, healthy bodies but not with the same physique that Naruto had. And especially with fewer scars. Where are we? He asked, calmer, but still with his feelings evident in his voice. At the Lord's mansion. You are one of his boys now. A boy with light brown hair and the same color eyes, said, hugging his own body and looking at him curiously. What? One of his boys? Naruto grimaced. He bought you. Paid a fortune to the guards. Paid the doctor who took care of you. It seems he liked you very much. I think I understand. A boy with dark hair and green eyes said, this being the largest among them, and apparently the oldest. Do you understand? You have golden hair and blue eyes. I've never seen anyone like that. You are handsome. Even with the scars. A unique boy, no wonder he found you interesting. He explained, and Naruto squeezed his arm, not liking to hear that. Dash dot. Why did he buy me? Why spend so much money on just one boy? The boys made a slightly somber expression, and Naruto dreaded to know the answer. He could see the fear and disgust in their eyes. He likes young boys, you know? It didn't take much thought to understand, and while it scared Naruto that he was in danger of going through a similar situation, it also filled him with anger. He knew what it was like to have his body touched, violated in a way, and he could see the broken eyes of those boys, as young as he was. The door to the place he was in was opened, and Naruto faced the Lord with angry eyes, blue flames burning in his gaze as the man descended the stairs. Ah, I heard noises, I came to see what it was, and what a surprise. The doctor said that you would only wake up after a day or two. You were in a good state, but tired. I must say that you have some very eye-catching scars. Poor child. The Lord said, approaching the cell where Naruto was and touching the bars, without taking his eyes off the blonde. Surprise, motherfucker. Get me out of here. Naruto growled. The Lord's dark eyes sparkled, and a smile broke out on his lips. What a dirty little mouth, but I must say it suits your appearance. I've never seen blonde hair like yours. Or eyes as blue and deep as these. A rarity. This, mixed with the money I paid, makes your freedom impossible, I'm afraid to say. He took a key and walked to the boys' cell, opening the door to their cell, who were clearly scared, but hid their fear, while the older boys stood in front of the younger ones, as a form of protection. I am not a fan of scars, but you, my dear, look different with them. They suit you, your beautiful body. Although your body is too big, in every way, for my taste, I wanted to take you the moment I saw you, even though you were dirty and covered with blood. The Lord said as he dragged the brown-haired boy out of the cell. Hey, leave him alone. Asshole. Naruto shouted, throwing himself against the bars. Ah. I know you're anxious, believe me, I am too. But the doctor said you need to rest. But don't worry, tomorrow we will have our moment alone. The Lord said, smiling at Naruto just before he left and closed the door behind him. Naruto continued to kick the bars of his cell. He kept kicking and punching the metal bars, ignoring the warnings or protests of the other boys, ignoring the pain in his leg, in his foot, in his body. Ignoring the blood that inevitably oozed out of him. It was futile, he realized after many, many attempts. Gasping, tired and sweaty, Naruto sat down at one end of his cell, resting his arm on his knee and gritting his teeth in frustration and anger. Anger, he was strangely used to that feeling. He could no longer imagine himself without that bitter feeling in his chest or those burning desires inside him, although occasionally they were not strong enough to overpower his body. Although at certain moments of slippage, that strong feeling proved to be dangerous, not only for him, but for the people around him. The door to the room he was in was opened, and his blue eyes stared coldly at the man, or rather boy, coming down the stairs. He was a teenager, probably not older than 20. He had dark hair and delicate expressions on his angry face. Finally decided to stop this futile attempt to escape. His voice carried anger and weariness, as well as a slight tone of disgust. He had a tray of food in his hand, which he dragged into Naruto's cell through a small passage at the base of the bars. Who the fuck are you? Naruto asked just as angrily, pulling the tray of food toward him and picking up the apple, taking a generous bite while looking disdainfully at the boy. It's none of the business of commoners like you. Have more respect. The boy spat, and Naruto smiled. Oh, I see, you are one of the Lord's little toys? You like being treated like a whore by an older man, right? He teased, something that certainly had an effect on the boy's indignant expression. Shut up. How dare you? What? Am I right then? TSC, pathetic. I would have cut his throat while he's sleeping by now. The boy took a few deep breaths, and for a brief moment, Naruto almost felt bad, seeing the pained expression on the older boy's face. But that soon returned with his angry, contemptuous expression. You don't understand anything. Eat your food and do us all a favor, shut up, and don't disturb us any more than you already did. The boy said with a more serious and controlled tone, but with hidden feelings, as he walked towards the door and closed it after leaving that room. Naruto sighed and finished eating his apple. He arched his eyebrow as he saw the rest of the food, and pushed the tray aside. It's not poisoned. He has a strict rule not to harm his possessions without them deserving it. The boy from before said, and Naruto stared at him. He was sitting on the edge of his cell, next to Naruto. His back was against the wall and his arms rested on his legs pressed against his body, hiding his private parts. You never know. How long have you been here? The boy made a thoughtful expression. A few years. Naruto arched an eyebrow. Years? How old are you? I'm 12. I was brought here when I was 9. I was a slave, but the Lord saw me and bought me. Naruto closed his eyes again. Slavery, another thing he didn't understand and didn't care enough to try to understand. It was stupid. Who was that? The blonde boy asked. He wasn't one to talk much, especially after what he had been through. But seeing a boy the same age, in the same situation, as well as other boys, maybe he reached a softer part inside himself. He felt sympathy for them, hidden behind his cold, angry expression, as well as his rough, commanding voice. His name is Hideki. He works for the Lord. He chooses the best-looking ones among his boys and keeps them even after they become adults. He said, and Naruto was silent for a while, only now realizing that the other boys were asleep. The hours passed, and he didn't even notice. What will happen tomorrow? The boy sighed. You will be taken by some servants to get to know your tasks, as well as your schedule. A schedule? Yes. Besides the chores you will have to do, you will also have a time to stay with the Lord. Her blue eyes widened slightly. Blue flames burned in his eyes, making it look like he was glowing in the dark. Soon, Naruto closed his eyes and sighed with some regret, propping his head on the wall. That situation sucked. He felt useless, he couldn't do anything. He hadn't found a way out, he was without his sword. Even if he could get out of that cell, he probably couldn't get out of that room, since the door was locked and there was no window there. His mind wandered far away, and he wondered what his father would do in his place. What any of his old gang would do in his place. He didn't know, but he was sure that they would not sit still, would not accept this without a fight, even if it cost them their lives. So that's exactly what he would do. What is your name? He was brought out of his thoughts by the boy's voice, and Naruto stared at him for a few moments. Naruto. Naruto. A unique name for a unique boy. I am Hans. It's good. It's good to meet you. I think. The boy smiled slightly. It's nice to meet you too. They were silent again, both trapped in their own thoughts. Naruto thought about what he would do, how he would get out of there. The Lord had paid for him to be forgotten by the guards, which meant that if he went out the front door, or was seen in the city, no one would do anything. Well, no one about the guards, maybe some relative of that merchant would try something. A sigh again escaped his lips, and Naruto didn't even realize he had fallen asleep. He awoke slightly startled, with images from the day before appearing in his mind. His eyes ran over his surroundings, until a strange feeling permeated his chest as he remembered where he was. He looked away as he stood up, arching an eyebrow at not seeing the boys in the cell, nor the tray that lay beside him. Someone broke in while I was sleeping. His body tensed and his eyes checked himself. He was the same way as the day before. Probably nothing happened. He would know. As if he was being watched, the door to the room opened as soon as he stood up, and two men dressed a suit similar to that of servants with chains in their hands approached the cell. Naruto's eyes widened slightly and he stepped away from the door to his cell as one of them opened it. Don't come any closer. He growled, getting into attack position. He didn't have his sword, but he had his teeth, his nails. His arms and legs. Do us a favor, kid, and behave yourself. One of the men said. He had brown hair combed to the side, while the other had dark hair, although he had the same hairstyle. As soon as the man approached, however, Naruto kicked him in the leg, bringing him to his knees, and landed a hook on his chin, sending the man backwards. The other tried to fight back, making a move in which Naruto understood that he wanted to grab something. Quickly, the boy moved forward, jumping on a railing beside him and using it as momentum to launch himself toward the man and hit him in the face with a kick. A strong blow, very strong, and the man fell backwards. It was then that Naruto saw that what he intended to pick up was a piece of wood. It wasn't a sword, but it was better than his fists. Jumping over the man, he quickly grabbed the piece of wood and the keys on his belt, running towards the door after him and out of that room. Before he could get far, however, two guards appeared in front of the door, and one of them hit him with a blow to the face, throwing the boy to the ground. Naruto spat out a small amount of blood as he felt his body pressed against the floor, and gritting his teeth, he tried to get up. But to no avail, the two guards held him down, while the two servants tied the chains on his arms. Not before they received a few blows from Naruto's strong legs, which certainly drew some blood as they hit them. "What the hell, kid? Why don't you keep still?" One of the guards asked angrily after using the chains to lift Naruto, and the blonde kicked the unprotected side of his leg. Once again, the guard was taken aback by the boy's strength. "Oh, shit. The kid is strong," the other guard exclaimed, holding Naruto tighter and taking his partner's chains. Now, the boy was in total control, chained by two armed guards and being forced to walk down that long corridor. "Let me go, you asshole," Naruto growled, struggling, kicking the air and biting the chains in pure rage, even though he knew it wouldn't help. "Damn, if our troops had the same disposition, we would be in profit," he heard a guard say, before having his chains tightened more tightly around his body. This would certainly leave a mark. He was led into a room, and as soon as he entered, his eyes ran over the other boys already in the room, all with collars around their necks, linked to each other by the chains on these collars. All in a single row, facing a double door, and just like him, all naked. Naruto gritted his teeth as he was pushed forward, and cursed softly as he felt a collar around his neck being attached to one of the boys he saw the night before. He just acted as if he didn't know him, a serious look focused only on the two doors. Probably because he was forced not to be distracted. His expression was exactly the same as the expression of the other boys. Soon, the two doors were opened by guards, and all the boys bowed. All except Naruto and the boys with whom his collar was attached. He just stared at the Lord with burning eyes, his chin raised in silent defiance. The Lord stared at him for a while, his dark eyes sparkling for a moment, before his expression became slightly irritated. "I had expected something like this, although it is still annoying to be challenged first thing in the morning." The Lord sighed, walking over to Naruto and slapping him across the face. To his surprise, however, Naruto did not move. He didn't even seem to feel the slap, and just stared at the nobleman. An intense blue swallowing the blackness of the noble's gaze. The eye contact was broken when one of the guards forced Naruto to bend down, grabbing him by the hair and pushing him down. The Lord stared at the boy's golden hair for a while longer, until he walked away. "He needs punishment, but don't hurt his face. I want him in my room by nightfall." That was the only thing he said as he walked away, and soon, the boys were able to raise their heads again. "What's the matter with you?" Naruto blinked and looked away, facing one of the boys also chained up. This boy had a slightly angry look in his eyes, but what was predominant was the fear in his greenish eyes, barely visible because of the brown hair that fell over his forehead. "If you want to be killed, die alone. Don't sink the others with you," the boy said, sighing as he felt the collar being released from his neck. "If you want to be someone's whore, do it alone. Don't mix me with you," he said in a cold voice, staring at the boy threateningly, until he was forced away by two other guards who pulled him away. "Okay, kid, first day and you're already in trouble," the guard grumbled, and Naruto snorted. "Seriously, I understand that it might not be a comfortable situation, but try not to make it worse," the guard said, and Naruto felt an enormous urge to laugh, but kept quiet. There was no point. They walked for a while, in which Naruto acquired as much information as he could, focusing his eyes for a few moments on all the exit doors and memorizing them in detail. Soon, they left the mansion and he was led to a secluded part of the property. A small hut, apparently abandoned, on the edge of the site, hidden by some trees. He was forced down the stairs to the basement, where he was soon tied to a chair after receiving a blow to the back of the head that disoriented him. The place stank of death. He even spotted some rats walking around the corners, as well as bloodstains on the floor and pieces of flesh in an advanced state of decomposition. He had always known that nobles had a rotten side. Shaking his head, Naruto recovers and starts trying to get out of that chair, forcing his arms to rip those ropes or struggling simply to knock the chair over and annoy the guards. But to no avail. The sound of tools caught his attention, and the blond boy's eyes widened slightly when he saw a pair of pliers in the hand of one of the guards who was approaching him with a neutral expression. "Arg, I hate to do this. But those are the rules. Choice, a finger or a toe?" The guard asked, kneeling in front of Naruto, still holding the pliers. The blond boy, however, spat in his face. "Go fuck yourself." He spat, and the guard sighed, crouching down and taking Naruto's right foot, placing the pliers around the second to last toe. "I hate to do this." With that, he squeezed the pliers, and a cry of pain escaped Naruto's throat, who struggled hard as he felt his finger being cut off. Hours passed, and Naruto remained quiet this whole time, focused on just doing what he had to do and swallowing that growing anger in his chest. The guards kept an eye on him the whole time, but because of his calm demeanor, they seemed more relaxed at the thought that having a finger ripped off made him put himself in his place. The boy's golden hair covered his eyes most of the time. He kept his head down in all his dealings, ignoring the insults, or the hints that were sent in his direction. And then came the time when he was required in the Lord's room. He was led towards the bathroom, where he was to clean himself and change his clothes. The bathroom was spacious and nice, but the boy didn't care. After making sure he was alone, he walked to the mirror. They said that the next day they would cut his hair and fix his appearance to make him look more decent. What a fucking joke. Naruto leaned on the sink and took a few deep breaths. His arms and hands were shaking from the anger he had inhibited for so long. The veins in his arms and neck were bulging, his muscles tensed. His heart was beating hard and he lost count of how many times he almost killed some guard or servant when he had the chance. Wait for an opportunity. He kept repeating those words in his mind, closing his eyes and trying to calm himself down. At least that situation would be behind him soon. Sighing, he removes his shirt when he hears knocking at the door and a voice warning him to hurry. Even though he didn't feel like it, Naruto stepped into the tub and washed himself, not sure when the next time he would have the opportunity to take a real bath would be. And since he got to that point, it was easier to play the game they want. After a while, he came out of the bathroom, already wearing different clothes and much tidier, although his expression was still annoyed and uncomfortable due to the smell of the perfume. Disgusting. His arms were placed behind his body and tied again with chains, but not as tightly as before. Okay, kid. Just try not to irritate the Lord and your evening will be peaceful. He doesn't usually hurt his boys. Just behave yourself and maybe you will even enjoy the food in the Lord's room. The guard who was leading him said, and Naruto just stayed quiet, not listening to a word he said. As soon as they arrived in front of the Lord's room, the guard knocked 3 times on the door, and the man appeared. "Ah, it took you long enough," he said with a smile, watching the guard remove the chains from Naruto's arms. "I'm sorry, sir, it took him a while to get used to his duties." The guard bowed and the Lord arched an eyebrow, staring at Naruto for a while. He seems more calm, the Lord said, patting Naruto's cheek lightly with his hand. The boy closed his eyes slightly, putting his arms behind his body and squeezing hard on his wrist to the point of bleeding. It would be easy to advance on the Lord now and rip out his throat with his teeth. But he restrained himself. Well, yes, sir. After his punishment he has become well behaved. It's a bit disappointing. But it's for the best. Thank you very much, you are dismissed. The Lord closed the door and Naruto closed his eyes again, this time more tightly as he felt his hands on his back. No need to be nervous. I don't bite. Not much. Haha. The boy's stomach churned and he felt a sudden urge to vomit, but he restrained himself. Taking a few deep breaths, he opens his eyes and walks beside the Lord further into the room. There was a table with food in front of it. Scented candles and even some sakura petals on the bed. I see that you are impressed with the decoration. Despite the strict treatment outside, in here I do everything to make my boys as comfortable as possible. It's not a very good time when one of the parties is not interested. The Lord said, pulling out a chair and turning to Naruto, motioning for him to sit down. The boy swallowed his desire to run away and walked briskly towards the Lord, sitting down and running his eyes across the table. There was food there that he had never seen before in his life, as well as strange colored liquids and a peculiar smell. I always prepare a good dinner. Like a date. I like to meet new people, talk to them in a friendly way in the few quiet moments I have. The Lord sat down at the other end of the table, directly in front of Naruto, pouring a purple liquid into his gold cup. Naruto had heard of that drink, wine, if he remembered correctly. I apologize for the rough treatment earlier today, but you, my boy, have not been behaving yourself. They looked at each other. Naruto stared at the Lord with his eyes wide open, and without realizing it, the man found himself suffocated by the burning blue of his eyes, consuming everything around them until there was nothing left but that intense blue. Try to be captured and forced to do something you don't want to do. The too cold voice for a boy echoed through the Lord's ears, and he felt his body shiver. The threatening tone was clearly present in those words, but apparently the nobleman did not seem to notice. Don't think like that. Think on the bright side, I saved you from a much worse life in prison. Normally, the penalty for murder is death. But, since you are a child mercenary, and witnesses said that that merchant tried to assault you, you would be sentenced to a few years in prison. And trust me when I say that it is not something you want. The Lord cut the meat on his plate and brought it to his mouth, without taking his eyes off Naruto. His dark eyes roared, he had a hopeful expression, almost as if he expected something. Sighing, Naruto picked up his fork and brought some food to his mouth. If it weren't for the situation he was in, he might even be able to indulge in those tastes that he had never experienced before. But he couldn't even if he wanted to. Not to mention that that food could very well be poisoned with something lethal or non-lethal. His body was strong, he knew that, so he just decided to eat some, as proof to the Lord that he was allowing himself to be carried away with the situation. The man looked satisfied and took a sip of his drink. We are here, having dinner together on this beautiful evening, and I don't even know your name. Naruto snapped the bones in his neck. Menma. That was my nickname. The Lord arched an eyebrow. Nickname? You don't have a name? No. They were silent for a while. Menma, huh? I can't say it suits you, but... Do you do this all the time? Naruto interrupted him. Do what? This. Dinner. You do this every day? The Lord smiled and shook his head. No. I don't have that much free time. But whenever I have time, I do. Like I said, I like to make my boys comfortable. Dash dot. I imagined. The Lord blinked a few times, slightly confused. You did? You called me an hour after my work schedule. It means you care about your boys. In a strange way, and it doesn't make much sense, but you care. The blond boy forced a smile, and the Lord sent him a happy expression, resting his head on his hand and looking at Naruto with bright eyes. You get the picture, apparently. And you still have your fierce personality, but with more understanding of your situation. I hate to see my boys get hurt, so I do my best to make sure they obey the orders they are given. Naruto pretended to drink some water, without taking his eyes off the man. Dash dot. Is my schedule the same as the other boys, or did I leave early because it is my first day? No, all the boys are released at the same time. They are slaves, in a way, but they deserve their rest. They should be in their cells by now. A strange gleam ran through Naruto's eyes, and he soon forced another smile. Where have you been, boy? I've never seen any man or woman similar to you. Around the world, I guess. I lived in hiding because of my appearance. Naruto replied, taking an apple. That was the safest thing he could eat there. Dash dot. And this scar? As I said, I think it suits your appearance, but it must have been a difficult situation. I was attacked by a beast in the forest. But my father killed it. The Lord arched his eyebrows. Oh, so the claws on that necklace are real. Exactly. They are part of my past, a last memory of my father as well as his sword. If it's not too much to ask, where? Don't worry, I won't let anyone touch your belongings, because they stay with me. He pointed to a door in the corner of the room, a few steps away from the bed. Nobles and their arrogance, he would never understand. How old are you? You're quite young, but to me, you look like a teenager. 10 years old, I think. The Lord arched his eyebrows in surprise. 10. You are quite big for someone so young. Yes, my father trained me to be able to defend myself. It's a cruel world out there for a child. I see. Well, I must say he did a good job. A child going up against all those guards without even an ounce of fear in his eyes is amazing. Naruto remained silent, glancing up at the balcony. Don't you think it's dangerous? He asked, and the Lord looked at him confused. Your boys are left alone in a cell, with no one to guard the entrance. Your servants can come and go as they please. Has it never happened that one of them hurt your property? Naruto asked, and the man stared at him for some time. Don't get me wrong. My father taught me to be cautious, especially about my brothers. I'm just using what I've learned to help my new colleagues, that's all. They may be older than me, but I am bigger. It's my duty to take care of them. The man looked at him in surprise, and a gleam of understanding ran through his eyes. Do you have brothers? I did. Not by blood, many were children who escaped from slavery. I have always been big. My father taught me to take care of those smaller than me. Those kids are nice, and they need a little support from time to time. The man smiled. It's great that you think so. You will do well here, better than I thought. No need to worry. The guards escort the boys to their cells, and as soon as they lock the doors, they hand over all the keys to me. Naruto looked away, staring at the food on his plate, not letting the Lord see the glint in his eyes. I think I'm comfortable enough. The Lord lowered his fork, staring at Naruto with a hopeful gleam and a bit of doubt. Really? Are you sure? You barely touched your food. Yes, I am sure. The Lord stood up after wiping his lips with a napkin. His slow steps approached Naruto, standing behind the boy. Naruto's expression remained unchanged, but he clenched his fist tightly, especially when the Lord began kissing and licking his neck. His blue eyes widened and his teeth gritted. His breathing became heavier and the Lord squeezed him in his arms, probably thinking that those gasps were suppressed moans. His stomach churned, and he nearly threw up what little he had eaten. Naruto didn't struggle when the Lord took his arm and helped him up, kissing his cheek as he walked him to the bed. "You are wonderful," he said amidst his kisses, throwing Naruto onto the bed as he began to remove his clothes. The boy just lay there, waiting. "The moment I laid my eyes on you, I could barely control myself. This body of yours. One of the best I have ever had the pleasure to buy," the Lord said, and Naruto, again, almost vomited when he saw the man already without clothes, slowly climbing the bed in a futile attempt to look sexy, perhaps. "Why are you still dressed?" Naruto used all his strength to look at him and make an expression other than disgust. "I'm waiting for you to take it off for me." The Lord's desire-filled eyes sparkled, and a smile broke out on his lips as he removed the shoes Naruto was wearing. Bending down, the Lord wrapped his arms around the boy's thighs, breathing deeply in an attempt to smell him more and more as his hands roamed Naruto's body. I love your legs." Soon, the Lord opened both his arms and took hold of the boy's waist, gently touching his skin as he prepared to pull his pants down. To his surprise, however, Naruto acted quickly, punching him hard in the face just as he lifted his head. The pain and surprise made him stunned, giving Naruto the perfect opportunity to land another punch to his chin and pull him back, entwining the Lord's neck with his legs and squeezing him with all his might. The Lord began to struggle and try to scream as Naruto strangled him with his legs, and the boy just stared, unblinking and with cold flames in his eyes at the nobleman's futile attempts to free himself. "What? Didn't you say you loved my legs?" His voice was so cold that it seemed to be able to blow out the candles around the room. The Lord's face grew redder and redder, and his dark, desperate eyes grew fainter and fainter, until they closed completely. But Naruto didn't stop there. He continued to strangle the Lord for a few more minutes, and with one swift and strong movement, he broke his neck violently. The loud noise of broken bones echoed through the room, and soon, 2 knocks were heard on the door. "Sir? Are you all right in there?" The muffled voice of a guard echoed through the room, and Naruto forced himself to fake a moan. The guard seemed to understand what was going on in there, and went back to doing his job. Naruto kicked the Lord's displaced head to the side and got up from the bed, walking with quick, silent steps toward the next door. As soon as he opened it, his eyes ran through the small closet. There were several personal items in there. Rings, necklaces, clothes, and even toys. With quick steps, he walks to the end of the closet and picks up his sword, putting it behind his back. Turning around, he begins to run his hands through the necklaces, until he finds the claws of the mountain lion he killed years ago and places the necklace around his neck. Returning to the wardrobe, Naruto opens a drawer beside the bed, exactly where the Lord kept his jewelry. Expensive necklaces and rings. He puts a few rings on his fingers, and the others that he can't get he keeps in his pocket as well as other jewelry. That was certainly worth a fortune. Checking the other drawers as fast as he can, he finds some keys which he assumes are for the boy's cells, since there are no other keys around. Turning, he walks to the balcony and analyzes the place. Getting out of there, at that moment, would be easy. It was dark, there weren't many guards up to the wall ahead, and it wasn't too high, he could make his way to the ground. However, the image of the boy's gazes returned to his mind, and for a few moments, he felt conflicted. To go out and ensure his escape, or to go back and try to help the others. Surely they had many boys in that mansion. Looking into the room, Naruto imagines what that man was doing with the boys, all he heard. A sigh of regret escapes his lips, and he turns away from the balcony. Looking around, Naruto picks up the bottle of wine and pours the drink over the bed and floor. Soon, he grabs a candle and sets fire to the bed. The flames spread quickly, slowly engulfing the Lord's body and spreading throughout the room. Turning, he walks to the door and puts his hand on the doorknob, the other on the handle of his sword. Naruto breathes heavily a few times, his pupils dilated, and he opens the door. One swift movement, his sword pierced the neck of the first guard he saw. The other was startled, but not quick enough to react in time, and Naruto slit his throat with his sword. Both guards fell to the ground, and Naruto grabbed the crossbow one of them had. Looking around, he pulls the guards' bodies into the room and closes the door, running down the hallway soon after. There were a few employees still prowling the empty hallways, but it wasn't hard to sneak into the room where the boys were being held. Opening the door, he runs down the stairs as fast as he can. Hans. He calls out to the boy, who looks surprised and stands up. Naruto? What the? His voice didn't come out when he saw Naruto unlock the door to his cell. The sound of the keys and the rusting bars drew the attention of the other boys who were huddled in the corner. Come on, we have to get out of here, he said, looking at the door to the room. They still hadn't found the bodies, nor did they know what was happening, but he didn't know how much time he had left. What? Are you out of your mind? How are we going to get out of here? Wait, what? We don't have time. We have a chance to get out, now choose. Do you want to run away from here, or do you want to continue to be a slave and consequently killed when you are of no use? Naruto's words were like a slap in Han's face, and the boy, still confused, made a conflicted expression. Right, okay, he said after a while, standing next to Naruto. The two boys looked at the others still curled up on the floor. That goes for you guys too, Naruto said. Where would we go? The blonde blinked, staring at the brown-haired boy. What? There's nothing for us out there. My parents are dead, we would just stay on the street. Here at least we have food and a place to sleep, the boy said with a downcast expression, hugging his own body. His other companions, although they didn't say, seemed to agree with him. Naruto sighed angrily and for a few moments considered closing that cell and leaving alone. But only for a few moments. Seeing Han's worried expression, he decided to insist. What is your name? He asked, and the brown-haired boy stared at him for a while. Konohamaru. Konohamaru, right. Naruto took a ring from his pocket and threw it in his direction. The ring was made of gold and held a huge shiny diamond. The boy's confused eyes alternated between him and the jewel in his hands. You say there's nothing there, but you didn't make the effort to look for it, you just accepted what the world threw at you. The world is unfair, just fucking deal with it. I'm giving you a chance for all of you. Naruto took another ring from his pocket, this one sporting an emerald the same size as the diamond, and handed it to Hans. Konohamaru stared at him for a while longer, closing his hand somewhat tightly and squeezing the ring. Muffled noises and shouts were heard, and Naruto made an annoyed expression. A simple choice, do you want to come, or not? He grunted, and soon, Konohamaru stood up and ran towards him, standing right next to Hans. Naruto stared at the boy for a while, before turning his gaze to the other shrinking boys. Is this really what you want? They didn't answer, and a sigh escaped their lips. They have been here all their lives. It pains me to say it, but they don't have much hope, Hans said, looking with genuine pain at the boys who avoided facing him. Naruto shook his head after a while, and then, closed the cell. Okay. Stay close to me, Naruto said, putting his hand on his sword handle as he left the room. The two boys ran after him. They had to be extremely cautious, because the fire had already spread throughout the Lord's room and all the desperate employees were evacuated from the place. "How many exits does this place have?" Naruto asked, running down the back corridor. "We can jump over the wall that leads to the river. Or we can go through the sewer, but it's in the opposite direction," Hans explained, his voice trembling with nervousness and anxiety. They continued running down the corridor, until they ran into two guards coming in the opposite direction. Grabbing his crossbow, Naruto shoots the guard on the right and draws his sword from its sheath. Leaping up, he spins his body in the air and severed the left guard's arm. A loud scream of pain echoed through the hall, but was soon ceased by Naruto's sword piercing his neck. The guard who was hit by the arrow got up and attacked Naruto. However, the blonde deflected with his own sword and gave him a low cut on the side of his waist, making the man fall to his knees, and finally, Naruto pierced the back of his head with his blade. The two boys looked startled and in awe at Naruto. He was swinging a big sword with such skill and violence. For a few moments, the bodies of the two guards didn't even bother them. Their eyes focused on Naruto, who was putting the sword back on his back. "Don't just stand there, come on," he said, causing the two boys to snap back to reality and start running behind him. They reached the backyard of the mansion, and Naruto ran his eyes up the tree in front of them. "The river is just beyond these walls," Hans said, and Naruto clicked his tongue as he saw more guards approaching. "Go ahead," he said, running towards the guards and getting into position so that one was in front of the other. Dodging a piercing attack, Naruto slashes at the side of the first guard's waist. However, he is forced to defend against the second guard's attack and move a few steps away. He dodges and deflects some of the man's attacks, and then ducks, cutting the side of the guard's leg, who has fallen to his knees. With one swift movement, Naruto dodges the first guard's attack and cuts his forearm, causing the man to drop his blade in pain. The boy tried to attack him again, but the guard dodged, and the other one on the ground landed a kick to the boy's stomach. Naruto gritted his teeth in pain, but soon recovered. Turning his body, he threw his sword at the kneeling guard and ran towards the other one. As soon as he approached, he threw his body to the ground and tripped him, catching his sword that stuck in the other guard's shoulder and piercing the back of his waist, going through every bone and muscle until the tip of his blade came out the other side. "Naruto!" Hans shouted, and Naruto pulled his sword back, putting it in its sheath and running towards the boy who already jumped towards the river. More guards approached, and Naruto gritted his teeth as he climbed the tree. His eyes focused on the silhouette of the river ahead, just as his ears heard the muffled sounds of the water following its path. He jumped over the wall. Without thinking much, he knew he would hesitate due to the height. But just as he did, an arrow hit him in the side of his abdomen while he was still in the air. Naruto screamed. The pain coursed through his body, but it didn't bother him for long. The last thing he saw was the water of the river getting closer and closer, and everything went dark.
This was it for today. To watch next part, subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. Till then, see you next time.